yet another country, Spain. Español, is that what you say? If you want to say it the right way. But I shall continue to call it Spain. In Europe, among all the beautiful countries, is Spain too. And some of us probably remember it also because of Christopher Columbus. Well, Spanish poetry is believed to have started somewhere in the beginning of the 3rd century. Medieval Spanish language, I believe, was a combination, a mix of Muslim, Jewish and Christian culture, which gave birth to what is called the Spanish vernacular. There have been epics too. The earliest epic was called the Centaur de Mio. The Spanish novel, we are told, began somewhere in the 16th century. The Spanish Civil War in the 19th century led to a lot of pessimism and disillusionment, and this impacted the literature of the period. I'm mentioning this in particular because our poem today is from this period. There was lyric poetry in the Middle Ages, and in the 19th century, Spain too saw the birth of Romanticism in their literature. Federico García Lorca, 1898 to 1936. He was a poet as well as a playwright. He is famous also for his Andalusian works like gypsy ballads. His tragedies were Bodas de Sangre. Sadly, he was executed by a nationalist firing squad at the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. During his writings, we notice that he experimented with many forms, especially inspired by Spanish folk songs. This was in the early 1920s. Like many other poets down the ages, he was accused of homosexuality, and he admitted to this, and his partner was the well-known Salvador Dali. You remember the surrealist painter, of whom you must have heard in different contexts. Lorca visited Cuba and USA, and we are told that he even exhibited his drawings in some of these places. The poem that we have today is Of the Dark Doves by this famous poet, Federico García Lorca. Of the Dark Doves is the title of the poem. Sets me thinking. I'm sure it would set you thinking too, because the dove is usually a symbol of peace. And when we think of a dove, especially with peace, we think of a white dove. But this is a dark dove. Let me read a few lines of the poem before I begin analyzing it for you. In the branches of the laurel tree, I saw two dark doves. One was the sun and one the moon. Little neighbors, I said, where is my grave? In my tail, said the sun. On my throat, said the moon. Let's pause for a moment and look at the objects that he's talking about. I already mentioned the dark doves, and they are sitting on the branches of a tree. And what trees come to your mind? It could be any, depending on which part of the world you live in. But here, they are sitting on the branches of a laurel tree. Do you remember the crown of laurels that was given to sportspersons in ancient times? When you think of the ancient Greek Olympics, they didn't have silver and gold medals or bronze medals. They were crowned with laurel leaves. So why laurel? Is he thinking of victory? Is he thinking of the end of the Spanish War? But remember, it's a civil war. And in a civil war, there can be no victory. It is brother against brother. Let me go on. He saw two dark doves. One was the sun and one was the moon. We can use our ideas of symbolism to see what they mean. And he asked them, where is my grave? Here is this poet who is walking along, who is disturbed by the civil war. So what could the grave indicate here? His own death? I sometimes do feel that it is not his death that he is thinking about, but he is thinking about the end of the civil war. Maybe that is the death that he is talking about. The poem intrigues me as I try to find meaning. And I was wondering whether the tail and the throat could be indication. The throat would be words and probably the tail would be action. He's wondering how many of these who are involved in the civil war really speak what they feel, and then if they've spoken, do they act on it? And then he goes on, and I was walking with the land around my waist, the land around my waist, as if he's carrying the land with him. What does it mean? Where is he going? I think he's going to nowhere. The poem is filled with this kind of absurdism, if I can think of that too as a figure of speech. Then what did he see? He saw two snow eagles. I saw two snow eagles and a naked girl. One was the other and the girl was none. Little eagles, I said, where is my grave? So he's not able to get over that symbolism of death. And then he says the girl was none. Every human being, according to the poet, is insignificant because the war really brings so many to face death. So now to the two eagles he asks again, where is my grave? In my tail, said the sun. On my throat, said the moon. Again we go on to that first thing that I told you, probably the throat and the tail, indicative of words and actions. And then the poem ends, probably where it began. In the branches of the laurel tree, I saw two naked doves, and both were none. Were they there or were they not there? Were they indicative of something or were they insignificant? Were they absurd? Did they have no existence at all? Lorca had a tough time, a tough life, and a poem like this shows us what he went through when the country was in the throes of a civil war. What is it that is the theme of the poem? The two dark doves, and therefore I think maybe it's not just the war. Dark doves, so maybe is it love? Love which has gone sour? There are figures of speech, but figures of speech at which you are probably experts. You have repetition, you have simile, metaphor, personification, symbolism. But I would just like to talk about imagery. You know, when a scene comes before your mind's eye, when you read a poem, that is what is a very simple meaning of the word imagery. So do you see the tree? Do you see the doves? Do you see the eagle? Right? I'm not talking about symbolism here. I'm talking about a purely clear description of what the poet sees. That is the symbolism. So look at the theme and then look at how he uses these figures of speech to bring it across. A poem like that this reminds me of what I would like to call poetry of resistance, right? So when something is happening around you and you don't agree with it, it could be political, it could be social, why? It could even be personal. There is, in a poem like this, that desire to resist. And I think that is so important for the human race. I'm looking at poems that were written probably before the independence movement in our country. They were poems of resistance. And I like such poems because they make me think. Did this poem make you think? Maybe you could read many more poems of resistance.